There is only one corner of the universe that you can be certain of improving, and that's your own self. Aldous Huxley. We've all dealt with difficult people. That coworker who turns everything into an argument. The boss who somehow makes every conversation more difficult than it needs to be. The relationship where you eventually realize that no matter what you say or do, there's going to be some type of issue. And in general, we're really good at recognizing problems in somebody else. We can tell you exactly what they do wrong. We can tell you how unreasonable they are and how whatever the conflict is, they started it. But there's another side of this coin which is often much harder to acknowledge. We're definitely nowhere near as good at recognizing deficiencies in ourselves with that same clarity. Because there's a difference between occasionally finding yourself around difficult people and continually finding yourself in difficult situations. But when the people and the environments change, yet somehow the story keeps repeating itself, at some point you have to stop looking at everyone else and start examining the one person who keeps showing up in each of those situations. Because maybe everybody else aren't the problem. Now, granted, that doesn't mean every conflict you've had is your fault. There are bad bosses. There are selfish people. There are unhealthy relationships. And there are situations where you can do everything reasonably well and still end up dealing with somebody else's problems. But one situation is different from a pattern. If you leave one job because the leadership is terrible, maybe the leadership was really terrible. But if you leave the next job because nobody appreciates you, and then the one after that because your coworkers are against you, eventually, there's a bigger picture than just what happened at each workplace. And the same thing happens outside of work. Maybe that friendship ended because the other person was selfish. Maybe your last relationship truly was dysfunctional. And maybe somebody in your family does treat you unfairly. But if the people and the circumstances are changing, and conflict seems to follow you wherever you go, you can't keep evaluating every situation as though it exists completely on its own. Yes, you might have legitimate reasons for being angry, disappointed, frustrated, or just done with someone. But being able to explain the different conflicts doesn't explain why you keep having them. Which is why the pattern matters. Because patterns give you information that individual incidents can't. And though the environments are different, but the outcome stays roughly the same, that's when it becomes harder to blame everything on circumstances. So then the better question is, what am I bringing into these situations that keeps producing some variation of the same result? But here's why that question is difficult. We don't experience ourselves the way other people do. You might think you're holding people accountable, where they might feel as though you're constantly being critical. You might think you have high standards, where others might see it as you're never satisfied. Or you might think you're standing up for yourself, but everyone around you feels like they're constantly preparing for an argument. Now, none of that automatically makes their interpretation correct, but it also doesn't make yours correct either. That's one of the biggest blind spots in self-awareness. We can know our intentions and all the reasons we reacted the way we did. But other people only experience how you present yourself. And intent can become a convenient defense because it allows you to dismiss the impact. Because if you're consistently saying, "That's not what I meant," granted, maybe it wasn't. But if you're regularly having to explain yourself, that's worth paying attention to, especially if it happens almost instantly. Say someone tells you that you were dismissive, but you immediately think, about what they did first. You justify the pressure that you're under. Or in your opinion, you believe your reaction makes sense. But think about that. You're given information about yourself, and instead of processing it, your first instinct is to defeat it. That's defensiveness. And it doesn't always have to be yelling or getting angry. Sometimes it's a calm, intelligent explanation. Sometimes it's bringing up additional facts. And sometimes it's pointing out the other person's deficiencies. Because if you believe that you're fair, hearing that you've been unfair creates friction. If in your mind you're easy to work with, being told you're difficult doesn't sit well. Or if you pride yourself on accountability, then having someone tell you that you don't accept responsibility is going to hit you hard. However, there's a difference between explaining your behavior and taking responsibility for it. Understanding why you reacted a certain way can be useful, but using that explanation to erase your responsibility isn't. You don't have to agree with everything somebody says about you, and you don't have to accept every accusation or criticism as truth. But if your first response is always to prove why they're wrong, you should at least consider what you're working so hard to protect. And oftentimes, the main thing we're trying to protect is our feeling of being respected. But respect is one of those words that can hide a lot underneath it. Think about what you actually mean when you say, somebody doesn't respect me. Did they truly insult you? Criticize your work? Fail to recognize your contribution? Or did they simply disagree with you? Or worse, just tell you no? Sometimes what we call disrespect is just the discomfort of not getting the response we expected, because many of us feel entitled. It's the expectation that people should respond when you want them to, that your effort should be recognized, that your opinion should carry more importance, or that because you've done something for somebody, they should do as much, if not more, in return. But when they don't, it feels personal. And now the conflict isn't about what happened. It's about what you believe you're owed. On the other hand, there are times when you do need to draw a line and refuse to tolerate how somebody treats you. But there's a big difference between having boundaries and requiring the world to interact with you according to your preferences. So if disrespect seems to be everywhere you look, maybe the problem isn't that people refuse to give it to you. Maybe what you need to do is show respect to them. However, what tends to happen after enough of these experiences is you can start building the story about how these things always seem to happen to you. People take advantage of you. People eventually disappoint you. Bosses never appreciate what you bring to the table. Or friends aren't as loyal as you are. But again, this isn't true 100% of the time. Maybe you have been betrayed. Maybe you've worked for somebody who treated you terribly. Maybe people you trusted really did let you down. Those experiences count. And acknowledging your own behavior doesn't mean pretending they didn't happen. But the problem starts when yesterday becomes the filter for today. That's how being wronged can become an identity built around being wrong. And after enough time, you can start behaving in ways that help create the ending you're expecting. You become suspicious. You're guarded, controlling. You're quick to react or slow to trust. And people feel that. So they begin pulling away. Then their distance becomes your validation that you were right about them, which then just becomes a vicious cycle. So eventually, you have to decide whether your experiences are things that happened around you, or if they'll become the reasons that you use to justify everything that keeps happening to you. There's a reason all of this is hard to see in yourself. If you were intentionally trying to be difficult, this would be easy. You'd know exactly what you were doing. But most of these behaviors don't feel unreasonable internally. They can actually feel justified. And that's where your standard has to be higher than simply being able to justify yourself. You can win the argument and still damage the relationship. You can prove somebody else was wrong and still have a piece of it to own. You can have legitimate reasons for how you behave and still recognize that the way you're showing up isn't working. Remember, your accountability gets tested when you could blame somebody else and probably make a real convincing case for it, or when every part of you wants to point across the table instead of looking at what you brought to it. So you don't need to accept every criticism people give you. Some of it will be wrong. Some of it will be unfair. But when different people in different places at different points in your life keep giving you some version of the same information, dismissing all of them eventually becomes its own decision. And admitting that doesn't diminish who you are, because you can't control who comes into your life, but you can control how you show up in theirs. As always, thanks for spending a few minutes with me. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and keep showing up.